The bullet carved a line through the dust 6 inches from Helena's boot, and she knew her father's men had finally caught up with her on the outskirts of Silverton, Colorado. She had been running for 3 days straight, ever since she climbed out of her bedroom window the night before her wedding to Gerald Ashford, a man twice her age who had offered her father a small fortune and political connections in exchange for her hand. The year was 1877, and women were expected to obey without question. But Helena Thompson had never been good at following rules that made no sense. At 22 years old, she had already watched 2 of her older sisters marry men they did not love, and she refused to become the 3rd sacrifice to her father's ambitions. The 2nd shot rang out closer, and Helena stumbled behind a cluster of rocks just off the mountain trail. Her lungs burned, her dress was torn and filthy, and she had not eaten anything substantial since yesterday morning. The landscape around her was unforgiving, all steep slopes and pine forests that stretched toward snow-capped peaks in the distance. She had hoped to make it to Silverton proper, find some way to board a stagecoach heading west to California, but her father's hired men were persistent. "Miss Thompson, come out now and this will go easier for everyone," a voice called out. She recognized it as belonging to Dutch Marlowe, one of her father's ranch hands who had been tasked with tracking her down. "Your father just wants you home safe. The wedding can still happen." Helena pressed her back against the cold stone, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She would rather die out here in these mountains than marry Gerald Ashford. The man had cold eyes and colder hands, and she had seen the way he looked at her, like she was property he had purchased rather than a person with thoughts and feelings of her own. She heard footsteps crunching through the underbrush, getting closer. There were at least 3 men, maybe more. She had no weapon, no plan, and nowhere left to run. The rock face behind her offered no escape, and the trail ahead was too exposed. Tears of frustration stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. If this was the end, she would face it with dignity. Then she heard a different sound, something that made Dutch and his companions stop in their tracks. It was the unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked, followed by a voice that seemed to roll down from the mountainside itself, deep and steady as thunder. "The lady does not seem interested in going with you gentlemen. I suggest you respect her wishes and move along." Helena peered around the edge of the rock and saw a man standing on a slight rise about 30 yards away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in buckskin and fur, with long dark hair pulled back and a thick beard that did not quite hide a strong jawline. He held a rifle with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly how to use it, and his stance suggested he would not hesitate if pushed. "This is not your concern, friend," Dutch called back, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "The lady is wanted by her family. We are just bringing her home. Seems to me if she wanted to be home, she would not be running." The man shifted slightly, and Helena noticed he had positioned himself so that he had clear sight lines to all 3 of Dutch's group. "I will give you boys to the count of 10 to get back on your horses and head down the mountain. After that, things will get unpleasant." Dutch exchanged glances with his companions. Helena could see them weighing their options, calculating whether retrieving her was worth getting into a gunfight with a mountain man who clearly had the advantage of position and preparation. Her father was paying them well, but not well enough to die for. "Mr. Thompson will not be happy about this," Dutch finally said, lowering his pistol. "He has a long reach, friend. You might regret making an enemy of him." "I have made enemies of worse men and slept just fine." The mountain man had not moved, his rifle still trained on the group below. 9, 8. That was all the encouragement Dutch needed. He gestured to his companions and they began backing toward their horses, keeping their hands visible and their weapons holstered. Within minutes, they had mounted up and were heading back down the trail at a quick trot, though Dutch turned in his saddle once to give Helena a long look that promised this was not over. Helena waited until they were completely out of sight before she allowed herself to breathe properly again. Her legs felt like water, and she had to brace herself against the rock to keep from collapsing. The mountain man descended from his perch with surprising grace for someone his size, his rifle now slung across his back. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, probably only in his late 20s, with gray eyes that assessed her with careful neutrality. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been when addressing Dutch. "No," Helena managed, though her voice shook slightly. "Thank you. You saved my life." "They were not planning to kill you," he said matter-of-factly. "Just drag you back to whatever situation you were running from, though I suppose that might be worse than dying, depending on the circumstances." Helena found herself letting out a slightly hysterical laugh at that observation. "My father wants me to marry a man I despise. I would rather take my chances out here." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her expensive but ruined dress, her soft hands that had clearly never done hard labor, her refined way of speaking. "You are not exactly equipped for mountain survival," he observed. "How far were you planning to run?" "As far as necessary." Helena lifted her chin, trying to summon some dignity despite her bedraggled appearance. "I can take care of myself." "Can you hunt, trap, start a fire without matches, navigate by the stars, treat a snake bite or a broken bone?" He raised an eyebrow. "Because those are the skills you will need if you plan to survive alone out here." Helena felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger. "I will learn. I am not stupid." "Never said you were," the man replied. "But learning takes time, and you do not look like you have much of that." "Those men will be back, probably with reinforcements. Your father sounds like the determined type." "He is," Helena admitted quietly. The fight went out of her all at once, and she felt suddenly exhausted. "I do not know what to do. I cannot go back, but I do not know how to go forward either." The mountain man was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with some internal debate. Finally, he sighed. "My cabin is about 2 miles up this trail. You can stay there until you figure out your next move. It is well hidden, and most folks do not know it exists. You will be safe there for a while at least." Helena looked up at him, surprised. "You would do that for a stranger." "I would do that for someone who needs help," he corrected. "Besides, I do not have much use for men who force women into marriages they do not want. Seen enough of that kind of misery to last a lifetime." "What is your name?" Helena asked. "Vincent Holloway," he said, offering his hand. "Most folks just call me Holloway when they call me anything at all." Helena took his hand, feeling the calluses and strength in his grip. "Helena Thompson." "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Truly." "Just Holloway is fine," he said, releasing her hand. "We should get moving. Those men might work up their courage and come back, or they might go get more help. Either way, I would rather not be standing here when they do." Helena nodded and started walking, though her legs protested every step. She had been running and hiding for days, and her body was reaching the end of its reserves. Holloway noticed her struggling and slowed his pace without comment, which she appreciated more than she could say. Some men would have made her feel weak for not keeping up, but Holloway simply adjusted to her limitations without making it into a discussion. The trail wound higher into the mountains, through dense stands of pine and aspen. The afternoon sun filtered through the branches in golden shafts, and the air grew noticeably cooler as they climbed. Helena tried to focus on the beauty around her, rather than the burning in her legs and the gnawing hunger in her stomach. She had left her father's house with only the clothes on her back and a small bag containing a few personal items, and what little money she had been able to gather without arousing suspicion. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to distract herself from her discomfort. "About 5 years now," Holloway said. "Came up here after the war, needed some quiet." Helena understood. The Civil War had ended 12 years ago, but its scars still marked the country and the men who had fought in it. She did not ask which side he had fought for because it did not seem to matter anymore. Both sides had produced broken men looking for places to heal. "You ever get lonely?" she asked. Holloway glanced at her, something flickering in his gray eyes. "Sometimes, but I prefer being lonely to being surrounded by people who do not understand me. At least alone I am honest about what I am." Helena thought about that as they walked. She had spent her entire life surrounded by people in her father's grand house in Denver, and she had never felt more alone than she had there. Everyone had wanted something from her, expected something of her, but no one had ever asked what she wanted for herself. "I understand that," she said quietly. They walked in companionable silence for a while longer, until Holloway led her off the main trail onto a smaller path that was barely visible unless you knew where to look. The path wound through a rocky ravine, and then up a steep slope that had Helena breathing hard and gripping onto tree branches for support. Just when she thought she could not take another step, they emerged into a small clearing that held a sturdy log cabin tucked against the mountainside. It was not large, maybe 2 rooms at most, but it looked solid and well-maintained. A stone chimney rose from one end, and there was a small covered porch with neatly stacked firewood along one wall. A stream gurgled nearby, providing fresh water, and the clearing had clearly been chosen for both its defensibility and its resources. From here, anyone approaching would be visible long before they reached the cabin, but from below, the cabin itself was nearly invisible against the forest. "Home," Holloway said simply, and Helena could hear the quiet pride in his voice. "You built this yourself?" she asked, impressed despite her exhaustion. "Mostly. Had some help from a trader who comes through occasionally." He led her inside, and Helena found herself in a surprisingly comfortable space. The main room held a large fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and books, and a bed built into an alcove in the corner. Another door led to what she assumed was a smaller back room for storage. Everything was neat and organized, the mark of a man who had learned to be self-sufficient. "You can have the bed," Holloway said, already moving to start a fire in the fireplace. "I will sleep outside or in the back room. There are some furs and blankets that should keep you warm." "I cannot take your bed," Helena protested. "You can and will," Holloway said firmly. "You look like you are about to fall over and I am used to sleeping rough. No argument." Helena was too tired to argue anyway. She sank into one of the chairs at the table and watched as Holloway efficiently got a fire going and then began preparing food. Within a remarkably short time, he had venison cooking in a pan and was mixing up some kind of bread to bake in a Dutch oven he buried in the coals. The smell was heavenly, and Helena's stomach growled so loudly that Holloway smiled slightly. "When did you last eat a real meal?" he asked. 2 days ago," Helena admitted. "I had some bread and cheese, but I ran out yesterday." Holloway shook his head but did not comment. He finished preparing the food and then served her a generous portion on a tin plate. Helena tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but she was so hungry that she found herself devouring everything within minutes. Holloway wordlessly served her another portion, and she ate that too, more slowly this time. "Thank you," she said when she finally felt human again. "I did not realize how hungry I was." The body has a way of shutting down when you are running scared, Holloway said. Adrenaline keeps you going until you feel safe, then everything catches up at once. He poured her some coffee, strong and bitter but warming, and Helena wrapped her hands around the tin cup gratefully. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The temperature was dropping quickly, but inside the cabin the fire kept everything warm and cozy. "Tell me about this marriage you are running from," Holloway said, settling into the other chair with his own cup of coffee. "If you want to, that is. Might help to talk it through." Helena hesitated, unused to anyone asking her opinion on anything. But something about Holloway's steady presence made her feel like she could speak freely, so she did. She told him about her father, Richard Thompson, a wealthy rancher who had made his fortune in cattle and mining, and who saw his daughters as valuable assets to be traded for business advantages. She told him about her two older sisters, dutiful women who had done what was expected and now lived in gilded cages, married to powerful men they barely knew. She told him about Gerald Ashford, 53 years old with a reputation for cruelty toward his servants and a previous wife who had died under mysterious circumstances. "My father said I was being hysterical when I refused," Helena said, staring into her coffee. "He said marriage was about security and position, not foolish romantic notions. He said I would learn to be content, just like my sisters had." "And you did not want to be content," Holloway said. "It was not a question." "No," Helena agreed. "I wanted to be happy. Is that so terrible? To want a life where I have some say in my own future. To want to marry someone I actually care about or not marry at all if I choose. It is not terrible," Holloway said quietly. "It is human. Your father is the one who is wrong, not you." Helena felt tears prick her eyes at those simple words. No one had ever told her she was right to want more. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the night sounds of the forest outside. Eventually, Holloway stood and pulled some blankets from a chest in the corner. "You should get some sleep," he said. "You are exhausted and your body needs to recover. I will keep watch tonight, make sure no one comes up the trail." "You do not have to do that," Helena said, though she was already swaying with fatigue. "I know," Holloway said, "but I will anyway." "Sleep, Helena. You are safe here." Helena did not remember walking to the bed or lying down. One moment she was sitting at the table, and the next she was waking up to sunlight streaming through the cabin window and the smell of bacon cooking. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. Holloway was at the fireplace, tending to breakfast, his hair still damp from what must have been a wash in the stream outside. "Morning," he said without turning around. "How do you feel?" "Better," Helena said, and she was surprised to realize it was true. Her body still ached, but the bone-deep exhaustion had eased. "Thank you for letting me sleep. You needed it." Holloway served up breakfast, and they ate together in the morning sunlight. Helena found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested years of living alone, doing everything himself. But there was also a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. The way he had given her his bed without hesitation, the way he had not pressed her for details she was not ready to share, the way he had simply offered help without expecting anything in return. "What will you do now?" Holloway asked when they had finished eating. "You cannot stay hidden forever." "Your father will keep looking." "I know," Helena said. "I thought maybe I could get to California, find work as a teacher or a seamstress, start over somewhere no one knows me." Holloway was quiet for a moment. "That is a long journey for a woman alone, dangerous too." "Everything is dangerous," Helena said. "Staying was dangerous, running is dangerous, At least this way I get to choose my own danger." A smile tugged at the corner of Holloway's mouth. "I can respect that, but you will need supplies, money, and training. You cannot make a journey like that unprepared." "I have a little money," Helena said, though she knew it was not enough for what she was proposing. "Stay here for a while," Holloway said. "A few weeks, maybe a month. Let your father's search cool down a bit. Meanwhile, I can teach you some survival skills, how to shoot, how to navigate, give you a better chance of making it to California alive." Helena stared at him. "You would do that?" "I would," Holloway said simply. "I've got nothing pressing to do, and it would not sit right with me, sending you off unprepared. Besides, I could use the company if I am being honest. Gets quiet up here sometimes." Helena felt something warm bloom in her chest, gratitude mixed with something else she could not quite name. "I would like that," she said softly. "Very much." So began a strange new chapter in Helena's life. The first few days were focused on basic survival skills. Holloway taught her how to properly start and maintain a fire, how to purify water from the stream, how to identify edible plants and avoid poisonous ones. He showed her how to set snares for rabbits and how to clean and cook what she caught. Helena had always been a quick learner, and she threw herself into these lessons with determination, wanting to prove she was capable of taking care of herself. Holloway was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid when she made mistakes, always willing to demonstrate something again if she did not understand. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes, making her laugh when she least expected it. She learned that he had grown up in Missouri, that he had fought for the Union during the war, and that he had lost his entire family to illness while he was away. When he came back, there was nothing left for him, so he had drifted west looking for a place where the ghosts could not follow him. "Did you find it?" Helena asked one afternoon as they sat by the stream, cleaning fish Holloway had caught. "Find what?" "A place where the ghosts cannot follow." Holloway looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw the deep sadness that lived behind his gray eyes. "No," he said honestly, "the ghosts always follow, but up here it is easier to live with them. The mountains do not judge, they do not ask questions, they just exist, and that is enough sometimes." Helena understood that better than she could explain. They went back to cleaning fish in companionable silence, and she found herself grateful for his honesty. So many men would have tried to pretend they had no pain, no past, but Holloway treated her like an equal who could handle the truth. As the days turned into weeks, Helena grew stronger and more confident. Holloway taught her to shoot, starting with a small pistol and working up to a rifle. She was not a natural marksman, but she practiced diligently until she could hit what she was aiming at more often than not. He taught her to ride properly, not side saddle like a lady, but astride like someone who needed to actually control a horse. They went on longer and longer trips into the mountains, and Helena learned to read the landscape, to understand how to navigate without getting lost. But it was not all lessons and survival training. There were quiet evenings by the fire where they talked about books, both of them having a love of reading that the other had not expected. There were mornings when they just sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the peaks. There were moments of laughter when Helena did something clumsy, and Holloway teased her gently, or when Holloway told stories from his past that were so absurd they could not possibly be true but probably were. Helena found herself looking forward to each day in a way she never had before. Back in her father's house, every day had been the same suffocating routine. But here, every day brought something new to learn, something new to discover about the world and about herself. And if she was being honest, she was also discovering things about Holloway that made her heart beat a little faster when he was near. She noticed the way his face softened when he smiled, the rare but genuine expression that transformed his whole appearance. She noticed the strength in his hands, but also the gentleness, the way he could handle a newborn rabbit with as much care as he handled his weapons. She noticed the way he always made sure she had enough to eat before he served himself, the way he unconsciously positioned himself between her and any potential danger, the way he listened when she talked like her words actually mattered. It was frightening how much she had come to care about him in such a short time. She had never felt this way about anyone before, this combination of respect and attraction and deep affection. She caught herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, memorizing the details of his face, the way he moved, the sound of his voice. And sometimes she caught him watching her the same way, an expression in his eyes that made her breath catch. One evening, about 3 weeks into her stay, they were sitting on the porch as the sun set when Holloway said, "You know, you do not have to go to California if you do not want to." Helena looked at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "What do you mean?" Holloway was quiet for a moment, staring out at the mountains. "I mean, you could stay here, if you wanted, build a life in these mountains. You are learning fast and you are tougher than you give yourself credit for. You could make a home here." "Stay here," Helena repeated slowly. "With you." Now Holloway looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that she had never seen before. "If you wanted," he said again. "I know I am not much, just a mountain man with a past I cannot escape. I cannot offer you the kind of life you are used to, the comfort and society and all that. But I can offer you freedom, a life where you make your own choices. And I can offer you honesty. I have come to care about you, Helena, more than I probably should. More than I thought I was capable of anymore." Helena felt like her heart might burst. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and strength. "I care about you too," she said softly. "I have tried not to because I thought I would be leaving soon, but I cannot help it. You make me feel seen in a way no one ever has before. You treat me like a person, not a possession. You have given me freedom and safety and taught me to believe in myself. How could I not care about you?" Holloway's fingers tightened around hers. "Your father will never stop looking for you. If you stay, you will be in danger. He might find you eventually. Then we will deal with that when it happens," Helena said firmly. "I am tired of letting fear make my choices for me. I would rather have a short life here with you than a long one somewhere else without you." "Helena," Holloway said, and there was so much emotion in his voice that it made her ache. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once you make this choice, it will not be easy to undo." "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," Helena said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Holloway pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her, and Helena rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. They stayed like that as the stars came out overhead, holding each other in the mountain silence, and Helena felt a peace she had never known before. This was what she had been running toward all along, even when she did not know what she was looking for. Not California, not escape, but this. A place where she could be herself. A man who valued her for who she was, not what she could offer him. A future she could choose. That night, they talked late into the evening about what staying would mean. Holloway was honest about the challenges. Winters in the mountains were brutal, and they would need to prepare carefully to survive. They would need to be vigilant about anyone who might come looking for her. They would have to be entirely self-sufficient because trips to town would be risky. But for every challenge he named, Helena had an answer. She was willing to learn, willing to work hard, willing to face whatever came as long as they faced it together. "We should get married," Holloway said eventually. "Not because I want to trap you or control you, but because it will offer you some legal protection. As my wife, You would have a different name, a different identity. It would make it harder for your father to claim you if he did find you." "Is that the only reason?" Helena asked, a smile playing at her lips. Holloway had the grace to look embarrassed. "No," he admitted. "I also want to marry you because I love you. I did not think I was capable of feeling this way again after everything I lost, but you have changed something in me. You have reminded me that there is more to life than just surviving. You have given me a reason to want to build something instead of just existing day to day." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said. "And yes, I will marry you. Not for protection or practicality, but because I want to build a life with you." They married a week later in a simple ceremony performed by a traveling preacher who came through the mountain settlements once a month. Holloway had taken her down to a small mining camp about half a day's ride from the cabin, far enough from Silverton that Helena was unlikely to be recognized, but close enough to access supplies when needed. She wore a simple dress that Holloway had purchased from a woman in the camp, nothing like the elaborate gown she had owned in her father's house, but she felt more beautiful in it than she ever had in silk and lace. The preacher asked no questions about their past, and the few miners who witnessed the ceremony were the kind of men who understood that the West was a place where people came to start over. After the brief service, Holloway slipped a simple gold band on Helena's finger, and she did the same for him. They were married in the eyes of God and the law, and Helena had never felt more joy. They celebrated with a modest dinner at the camp's only restaurant, and Holloway bought supplies they would need for the winter that was coming. Helena noticed the way he held himself differently now, more relaxed, like some burden had been lifted from his shoulders. On the ride back to the cabin, with Helena seated in front of him on the horse, she leaned back against his chest and felt completely content. "Happy," Holloway murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Helena replied truthfully. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous despite their feelings for each other. Holloway was gentle and patient, and Helena felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the forest outside, and Helena marveled at how much her life had changed in just a month. She had gone from a trapped, frightened woman to someone with agency and purpose. She had found love in the last place she expected it. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Helena's life. She and Holloway worked together to prepare for winter, cutting and stacking firewood, hunting and preserving meat, gathering and storing every edible plant they could find. Helena learned to cure hides and make clothes, to dry herbs for medicine, to do the 100 small tasks that would keep them alive and comfortable through the harsh mountain winter. But it was not all work. There were afternoons when they explored the mountains together, discovering hidden valleys and crystal-clear lakes. There were evenings when they read to each other by firelight, working their way through Holloway's small but eclectic library. There were mornings when they woke wrapped in each other's arms and took their time greeting the day, learning each other's bodies and souls with equal devotion. Helena had worried that living in such isolation might feel confining, but instead, she felt freer than ever before. Every choice she made was her own. Every day was shaped by her decisions and efforts. She was building something real and meaningful, and she was doing it with a partner who respected her as an equal. The first snow came in late October, just a dusting that melted by afternoon, but it was a reminder that winter was coming. Holloway taught Helena how to navigate in snow, how to recognize the signs of an approaching storm, how to stay warm and dry even in bitter cold. By the time the heavy snows began in November, Helena felt confident that they could handle whatever the winter threw at them. It was a hard winter, though, colder than Holloway had seen in years. There were days when they could not leave the cabin because the snow was too deep or the wind too fierce. But Helena did not mind. Inside their small home, with a fire crackling and supplies well stocked, she felt perfectly content. They played card games and checkers, told each other stories from their pasts, planned what they would do when spring came. Holloway carved wooden utensils and tools while Helena practiced her sewing and mending, making improvements to their clothes and blankets. It was during one of these long winter evenings that Holloway said, "I want you to know, if you ever regret this choice, if you ever want to leave, I will not stop you." Helena looked up from her sewing, surprised. "Why would you say that?" "Because I worry sometimes that I am being selfish, keeping you here," Holloway said. "You gave up so much. Your family, even if they were not good to you. Society, comfort, the life you were raised for. Sometimes I wonder if you will wake up one day and realize what a poor trade you made." Helena set down her sewing and moved to sit beside him. She took his hand and held it tightly. "Vincent Holloway, listen to me. I did not give up anything I wanted to keep. I traded a gilded cage for freedom. I traded a life of empty comforts for a life of real meaning. I traded loneliness for love. That is not a poor trade. That is the best decision I have ever made." "But you could have so much more," Holloway said. "A real house, nice things, children." "We can have children here if we want them," Helena pointed out. "We can build whatever life we choose. And as for nice things, I have learned that the nicest things are not objects. They are moments like this, where we are together and honest and real. I would not trade that for all the silk dresses and fancy houses in the world." Holloway pulled her close and kissed her, deep and lingering. "I love you," he said when they finally pulled apart. "I do not say it enough, but I do. You have given me a life worth living again." "And you have given me freedom," Helena said, "and love, and a future I choose. We have given these things to each other. That is what makes it so precious." Winter deepened, and then eventually began to loosen its grip. The snow started to melt in late February, and by March, the first green shoots were pushing up through the mud. Helena felt renewed by the change in seasons, eager to explore the world that had been locked away under ice and snow. She and Holloway began taking longer trips again, checking trap lines and hunting for fresh meat after months of preserved food. It was on one of these trips, in early April, that they saw smoke rising from the direction of the mining camp they had visited for their wedding. Too much smoke, black and angry. They rode toward it cautiously and found the camp in chaos. A fire had destroyed several buildings, including the small general store and the boarding house. People were standing around looking dazed and overwhelmed. Without discussing it, Helena and Holloway immediately began helping. They assisted in organizing a bucket brigade to prevent the fire from spreading to the remaining structures, helped set up temporary shelters for those who had lost their homes, and distributed what supplies they had brought with them to those in need. By the time everything was under control, it was too late to ride back to the cabin, so they made camp on the outskirts of the settlement. As they sat by their small fire that night, a woman approached them hesitantly. She was in her 30s, with a tired face and worn clothes. "I wanted to thank you both," she said. "For your help today. You did not have to stop, but you did." "Anyone would have," Holloway said, though they all knew that was not true. "I am Ruth Miller," the woman said. "I run the boarding house, or I did anyway. Not sure what I will do now." "You will rebuild," Helena said with certainty. "This community needs a boarding house and you will make it happen." Ruth smiled sadly. "I appreciate your confidence, but I am not sure I have the strength." "You do," Helena said firmly. "You have survived everything life has thrown at you this far. You will survive this too." Ruth looked at her curiously. You talk like someone who knows something about surviving." "I suppose I do," Helena said. And then she and Ruth began talking, really talking about their lives and experiences. It was the first real conversation Helena had had with another woman since she had fled her father's house, and she realized how much she had missed female companionship. By the time they parted ways, Ruth was smiling and Helena had promised to visit again soon. On the ride back to the cabin the next day, Holloway said, "You were good with her. With all of them, actually." "I forgot how much I enjoy helping people," Helena said thoughtfully. "Back in Denver, I was involved in charity work, but it always felt performative. My mother wanted us to be seen doing good deeds, but she did not really care about the people we were helping. Today felt real. It felt like it mattered." "It did matter," Holloway assured her. "You made a real difference." Helena was quiet for a moment, an idea forming. What if we did more of that? Not just when we stumble across an emergency, but intentionally. We know these mountains. We have skills. We could help people who need it. Holloway considered this. It would mean being more visible, more interaction with others. That increases the risk of your father finding you. "I know," Helena said, "but I am tired of living in fear. And honestly, enough time has passed that I think he may have moved on. He has other daughters he can marry off, other business deals to make. Maybe he has decided I am not worth the effort anymore." "Maybe," Holloway said, though he did not sound entirely convinced. "But if we do this, we do it carefully. We do not advertise who you are or where you came from. We just be a mountain man and his wife, helping where they can." "I can live with that," Helena said. So they began a new pattern. Once a month they would ride down to the mining camp or other small settlements in the area, bringing game meat to trade, offering their skills and labor where needed. Helena discovered she had a talent for nursing, helping treat injuries and illnesses with the herbal remedies Holloway had taught her and common sense she had learned from a doctor who frequented the camps. Holloway used his knowledge of the mountains to help guide hunting parties and advise on where to find clean water and good timber. They became known as reliable and trustworthy, the kind of people who kept their word and did not ask questions about anyone else's past. Helena made friends among the women in the settlements, grateful for female companionship after months of isolation. Ruth Miller became a particular friend, a practical and kind woman who appreciated Helena's direct manner and willingness to help. Summer came, hot and bright, and Helena reveled in the long days and abundant life. She and Holloway planted a small garden near the cabin, and she loved watching things grow under her care. They explored new territories together, always pushing a little further, discovering hidden places of staggering beauty. At night, they would lie on a blanket outside and watch the stars, talking about everything and nothing, completely content in each other's company. It was during one of these perfect summer nights that Helena realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but now she was certain. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she had been feeling queasy in the mornings. But more than the physical signs, she just knew. There was a life growing inside her, a combination of her and Holloway, and the knowledge filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She waited until the next morning to tell Holloway, unsure how he would react. They had never explicitly discussed children, though the possibility had come up in passing. When she finally gathered her courage over breakfast, she simply said, "I am pregnant." Holloway froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. He stared at her, processing the information. And for a moment, Helena worried she had made a terrible mistake, that he did not want children, that this would change everything between them. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen from him, and he set down his cup with shaking hands. "You are sure?" he asked. "As sure as I can be without a doctor," Helena said. Are you happy about it? Happy, Holloway laughed, a sound of pure joy. Helena, I am terrified and thrilled and amazed all at once. I never thought I would have a family again after I lost everyone. I never thought I would have something to look forward to like this. Of course I am happy. He pulled her into his arms and held her close, and Helena felt tears streaming down her face, relief and happiness overwhelming her. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other and marveling at the miracle that was growing between them. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing. Holloway became even more protective, though he tried not to be overbearing about it. Helena insisted on continuing to do her share of the work, though she let Holloway take on the heavier tasks as her belly grew. They spent the late summer and fall preparing for the baby's arrival, building a cradle from pine wood, sewing tiny clothes from soft fabric they purchased in town, stocking up on extra supplies so Helena would not have to worry about anything but recovery after the birth. Ruth Miller, who had successfully rebuilt her boarding house and become a close friend, was thrilled by the news. She had raised 4 children of her own and was a wealth of practical advice. "You will be fine," she assured Helena during one of their monthly visits to the camp. "Women have been having babies forever. Your body knows what to do. But what if something goes wrong?" Helena could not help asking. Childbirth was dangerous, and she knew many women who had died bringing life into the world. "Then I will be there to help," Ruth said firmly. "When your time comes, send Holloway to fetch me. I have helped deliver more babies than I can count. You will not go through this alone." The promise eased some of Helena's anxiety. As winter approached again, she felt huge and uncomfortable but also deeply content. She loved feeling the baby move inside her, loved watching Holloway's face light up when he placed his hand on her belly and felt a kick. They spent the early winter evenings talking to her stomach, telling stories and singing songs, preparing their child for the world it would soon enter. The baby came in late January, during one of the coldest nights of the year. Helena's labor started in the evening, and Holloway rode through darkness and snow to fetch Ruth, who came immediately despite the weather. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Helena thought she could not bear it. But Ruth talked her through it with calm competence, and Holloway held her hand and refused to leave her side, his presence giving her strength. Just before dawn, Helena delivered a healthy baby boy with powerful lungs and a head of dark hair. Holloway wept when he held his son for the first time, and Helena, exhausted but euphoric, watched her 2 favorite people and felt her heart might burst with love. They named him Thomas, after Holloway's father who had died while Holloway was at war. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he seemed to take to mountain life naturally. Helena recovered well from the birth, and soon she was back to her regular activities, though now with a baby strapped to her back in a carrier Holloway had crafted. The next few years passed in a blur of joy and exhaustion. Thomas grew from a baby into a curious toddler who wanted to explore everything. Helena and Holloway took turns watching him while the other worked, and they discovered that parenting together was its own kind of adventure. There were frustrating moments when Thomas would not sleep or eat, but there were far more moments of wonder, watching him discover snow for the first time or laugh at a butterfly. When Thomas was 2, Helena became pregnant again. This time, she felt more confident, knowing what to expect. She gave birth to a daughter in the spring, an easier labor than the first. They named her Grace, and she had her mother's green eyes and a personality that was somehow both fierce and sweet. Life was full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but Helena had never been happier. She was living the life she chose, with the man she loved, raising children who would grow up free and strong. Sometimes she thought about her father and wondered if he was still looking for her, but those thoughts came less and less frequently. She was Helena Holloway now, not Helena Thompson. That other life felt like it had belonged to someone else entirely. When Grace was a year old, they made one of their regular trips to the mining camp, which had grown into a proper town now with a post office and a church. As they walked down the main street, Helena pushing Grace in a small cart Holloway had built while Thomas held his father's hand, Helena saw a man standing outside the general store who made her blood run cold. It was Dutch Marlowe, her father's ranch hand, the man who had tracked her into the mountains 5 years ago. He was older now, grayer, but she recognized him immediately. And from the way he suddenly straightened and stared at her, he recognized her too. Helena's heart raced, but she forced herself to keep walking calmly. Holloway noticed immediately that something was wrong and followed her gaze. His hand moved to the pistol at his hip, not drawing it but ready. "Helena Thompson," Dutch said as they approached, his voice full of recognition. "Or I guess it is Holloway now. Your father has been looking for you for 5 years." "My father does not have any claim on me," Helena said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "I am a married woman with children. I have made my own life." "He still wants to see you," Dutch said. "Still wants you to come home. He has authorized me to offer you money, security, anything you need. He just wants his daughter back." "I am not his daughter anymore," Helena said firmly. "I am not his anything. I made my choice and I am not going back." Dutch looked at Holloway, assessing him. "You are the mountain man who ran us off all those years ago. I remember you." "I remember you too," Holloway said evenly. "And my position has not changed. The lady has made her choice and you need to respect it." "It is not that simple," Dutch said. "Mr. Thompson is a powerful man. He can make life very difficult for you both if he chooses." "Let him try," Holloway said. "We are not afraid of him." Helena put her hand on Holloway's arm, a calming gesture. She looked at Dutch directly. "Tell my father that I appreciate whatever concern he might have, but I do not need or want his help. I have built a good life here, a life I chose. I am happy. Tell him that I wish him well, but I will not be coming back to Denver. Not now, not ever." Dutch studied her for a long moment, taking in her weathered hands and simple clothes, the children, the way she stood close to Holloway with complete trust. Whatever he saw made him sigh. "You really are happy," he said, sounding almost surprised. "I really am," Helena confirmed. "Well, I suppose that is something," Dutch said. He tipped his hat. "I will tell your father what you said. I cannot promise he will accept it, but I will tell him. For what it is worth, you look well, Mrs. Holloway, better than you ever did back in Denver." "Thank you," Helena said, surprised by the genuine note in his voice. Dutch walked away, and Helena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Holloway pulled her close, Thomas pressing against their legs and Grace reaching up from her cart. They stood there together, a family, and Helena felt the fear that had gripped her drain away. "Are you all right?" Holloway asked quietly. "I am," Helena said, and she meant it. "I was scared for a moment, but now I just feel relieved. He saw me. He saw what my life is now. And I think he understood." "Your father might still cause problems," Holloway warned. "Maybe," Helena said, "but we will face that together if it comes. And honestly, I think Dutch was right that I look happier. I think even my father might understand that forcing me back would be cruel, not kind." They finished their business in town and rode back to the cabin that afternoon, all 4 of them together. Helena held Grace while Holloway managed Thomas, who chattered excitedly about everything he had seen in town. As they climbed higher into the mountains back toward their home, Helena felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced the ghost of her past and survived. More than survived, she had proven to herself that she had made the right choice. No amount of wealth or comfort could compare to the life she had built with Holloway and their children. This was real. This was hers, and no one could take it from her unless she let them. 2 months later, a letter arrived at the general store in town addressed to Helena Holloway. It had come from Denver, and Helena opened it with trembling hands, unsure what to expect. Inside was a single page in her father's distinctive handwriting. "Helena," it read, "Dutch told me he found you and that you seem content with your choices. I confess, I do not understand how you could prefer a life of hardship to what I could have given you, but I raised you to be strong-willed, so perhaps I should not be surprised. Your mother asks after you and wants to know you are well. If you are happy, then I suppose that must be enough. I will not send anyone else to find you. Live your life as you see fit. Your father, Richard Thompson." It was not an apology, and it was not exactly a blessing, but it was acceptance. Helena read the letter 3 times, then showed it to Holloway. "He is letting me go," she said, still not quite believing it. "You were never his to let go," Holloway pointed out gently, "but I am glad he has finally realized it." Helena folded the letter carefully and placed it in the small box where she kept her few treasures. Then she walked outside to where Thomas and Grace were playing in the summer sunshine, and she smiled. The past was truly past now. She was free to move forward without looking over her shoulder. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and exploring, so much like his father that it sometimes made Helena laugh. Grace became a wild spirit who feared nothing, climbing trees and catching fish and refusing to wear shoes unless absolutely necessary. When Grace was 4, Helena gave birth to another son, William, who had his mother's green eyes and a calm disposition that balanced out his siblings' energy. Helena and Holloway worked together to build a life that was rich in everything that mattered. They added a room onto the cabin as the children grew. They built relationships with their neighbors in the various mountain settlements, becoming valued members of a loose community of independent-minded people who had all chosen mountain life for their own reasons. Helena taught several of the camp children to read, holding informal lessons in Ruth's boarding house during the winter months when travel was difficult. Holloway taught Thomas and eventually Grace to hunt and track, passing on the skills that had kept him alive. He also taught them respect for the land, for the animals they hunted, for the delicate balance that allowed humans and nature to coexist. Helena taught the children reading and arithmetic, history and geography, making sure they had the education she valued even if they would never set foot in a formal school. As the children grew older, Helena sometimes told them stories about their grandmother and aunts back in Denver, about the life she had left behind. She wanted them to understand where she had come from and why she had made the choices she did. She wanted them to know that they always had choices, that they should never let fear or obligation trap them into a life they did not want. "Did you ever miss it?" Grace asked once, when she was about 12. "The pretty dresses and the big house and all that?" Helena considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss certain things," she admitted. "I miss my mother, even though she disappointed me. I miss some of my books that I had to leave behind. I miss hot baths and soft beds occasionally, but I have never once regretted leaving. Not for a single day. Because everything I gave up was just things, and what I gained was freedom and love and you children. That is not even close to a fair trade. I got the much better deal." "I am glad you ran away," Grace said, hugging her mother. "Otherwise we would not exist." "Best decision I ever made," Helena agreed, hugging her daughter back. When Thomas was 16, a young man from one of the mountain settlements came courting. Helena watched her son navigate the complexities of young love with advice from both his parents, and she was proud of the thoughtful, respectful way he treated the girl. It reminded her that she and Holloway had raised good humans, people who understood that love was about respect and partnership, not ownership and control. Grace, 2 years younger, showed no interest in romance yet. She was too busy learning to shoot as well as her father, and planning expeditions to parts of the mountains they had not yet explored. William, still young, was content to help in the garden and learn to carve wood like his father. Helena was 40 years old now, her dark hair starting to show threads of gray, her hands permanently weathered from years of mountain life. Holloway was 45, his beard more gray than brown, his body showing the wear of hard living but still strong and capable. They still loved each other as deeply as they had that first summer, perhaps more so because their love had been tested and proven over years of partnership. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set while the children did evening chores, Holloway took Helena's hand. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" he asked. "If you had not fled that marriage, if we had never met?" "Sometimes," Helena admitted, "but not with regret, more with horror at what I avoided. I probably would have been miserable with Gerald Ashford, assuming he did not kill me like his first wife. I certainly never would have experienced real love or real freedom. I never would have become the person I am now." "I think about it too," Holloway said. "About what my life would have been if you had not stumbled into it. I would have survived, I suppose. I was good at that. But I would not have lived. You taught me the difference." Helena leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content. "We saved each other," she said. "I like that. It is much better than some prince rescuing a princess or whatever those fairy tales say. We met each other when we both needed saving, and we chose to do it together." "Best partnership I ever entered into," Holloway agreed. They sat in peaceful silence as the stars came out, listening to their children's voices and laughter from inside the cabin, the sounds of the life they had built together. Helena thought about the terrified young woman who had climbed out a window in Denver all those years ago, running blindly into the unknown. That woman could never have imagined this future, this happiness, this sense of belonging. But she had been brave enough to run anyway, to choose the unknown over the unbearable. And that courage had led her to everything she had ever wanted, even when she had not known she wanted it. Years continued to pass, marked by the seasons and the rhythms of mountain life. Thomas married the girl he had courted and built his own cabin nearby, starting his own family. Grace eventually fell in love with a young man who worked as a guide for hunting parties, someone who matched her adventurous spirit. They married when she was 20 and continued living a life of exploration and freedom that made Helena proud. William, the youngest, became a skilled craftsman, creating beautiful and functional items from wood and metal that were sought after throughout the mountain communities. Helena and Holloway became grandparents multiple times over, their cabin frequently filled with the noise and chaos of visiting grandchildren. Helena loved being a grandmother, loved the way it allowed her to enjoy children without the constant responsibility of raising them. She told stories and taught lessons and spoiled the grandchildren appropriately, then sent them home to their parents when she was tired. As they grew older, Helena and Holloway slowed down but never stopped. They still took walks through the mountains they loved, though they did not go as far or as fast as they once had. They still worked together on daily tasks, their partnership as strong as ever even as their bodies grew weaker. They still sat on their porch watching sunsets, still talked late into the night about everything and nothing, still loved each other with a depth and constancy that made others envious. Ruth Miller, their old friend, passed away when Helena was 55, and Helena mourned the loss of someone who had been there at crucial moments of her life. But she also felt grateful for the friendship they had shared, for the way Ruth had helped and supported her when she was young and scared and learning to be strong. Helena's mother died a year later. Helena learned about it from a letter sent by one of her sisters, who had somehow tracked down her address. The letter was tentative and kind, expressing a desire to reconnect if Helena was willing. Helena wrote back, and she and her sisters began a careful correspondence, rebuilding a relationship that had been broken by their father's actions. They never saw each other face to face again, but the letters brought Helena some closure, some connection to the family she had left behind. Her father lived to be very old, and when he died, Helena felt surprisingly little. She had made her peace with him long ago, and his death changed nothing about her life or choices. She sent a polite condolence to her sisters and continued living the life she had built. By the time Helena and Holloway reached their 70s, their children were middle-aged, and their grandchildren were having children of their own. The cabin in the mountains had become the heart of a small family legacy, a place where everyone gathered for celebrations and holidays, where stories were told and traditions were passed down. Helena's hair was completely white now, her face lined with wrinkles earned from years of sun and wind and laughter. Holloway moved slower, his joints stiff from decades of hard work, but his gray eyes were still sharp, and his smile still made Helena's heart flutter. They had lived a good life, a full life, and neither of them had any regrets. One spring morning, when Helena was 73, she woke to find Holloway had passed peacefully in his sleep. He looked calm, almost smiling, and Helena sat beside him for a long time, holding his cooling hand and remembering everything they had shared. She did not cry, not yet. She just felt grateful for every moment they had been given, every choice that had led them to each other, every year of partnership and love. The family gathered for Holloway's funeral, and they buried him on the mountain he had loved, in a spot overlooking the valley where he could watch the sun rise forever. Helena stood at the grave with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren surrounding her, and she felt his presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, "for everything, for saving me and letting me save you, for building this life with me, for every single day." She lived another 2 years after Holloway's death, years spent mostly at the cabin but sometimes visiting her children and their families. She wrote down the story of her life, wanting her descendants to understand where they came from, what choices had created the family they were part of. She recorded everything, from her flight from Denver to her first meeting with Holloway to the life they had built together. When Helena died peacefully in her sleep at 75, her children buried her beside Holloway on the mountain. The two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love and freedom over security and convention, were together again in the land they had made their own. Their cabin stood for many more years, maintained by children and grandchildren who understood its significance. The story of Helena and Holloway became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It became a reminder that courage and choice could change everything, that love found in unexpected places was often the strongest kind, that building a life together was more valuable than any inherited fortune. The mountain settlements grew into towns, and the towns grew into small cities, but that spot high in the Colorado Rockies remained wild and beautiful. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, people said you could still hear echoes of laughter and love, the spirits of a woman who fled an arranged marriage and a mountain man who offered protection and became her choice, forever together in the place they had made home. Their legacy lived on in the family they had created, in children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who understood the value of freedom and love. They lived on in the stories told around fires and dinner tables, in the choices made by people who remembered that they always had agency, that they could always choose their own path. Helena Thompson, who became Helena Holloway, who ran from an arranged marriage and found true love in the mountains, had lived exactly the life she wanted. And that, in the end, was the best possible ending anyone could hope for.